welcome to Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, Exam 1 Study Guide. So some vocabulary that might not necessarily be on the exam, but to know our historical criticism, which is basically the idea that literature and history are kind of intertwined. Historicism, which is the study of literature through history, and vice versa. A memoir is a recollection of facts and about a person's life, and an autobiography is more uh, of a recollection of events or a certain event that happened in someone's life and the emotions and thoughts that happened. Frederick Douglass is not Frederick Douglass's narrative is a autobiography. Uh, the genre of slave narrative is a popularized genre in the 30 years leading up to the Civil War. This is like right around the time that Frederick Douglass's narrative was written. These are the guidelines that they generally follow, and when modern scholars talk about the slave narrative, the go-to reference is the narratives of the life of Frederick Douglass, typically. Frederick Douglass was a former slave born in Maryland, where he spent most of his slave years. And he's a strong advocate for abolitionism and human rights. He was also at the Seneca Falls Convention in support of women, and he gave a speech there. He's a great orator, writer, and editor, and he wrote this book in 1845. Some accomplishments that he made in his life. I won't read all of them, but an important one to know is that he wrote this book, and after he left for England until he could pay for his way back, he could pay for his freedom in America, fearing recapture after the book was released. Another important one is his own abolitionist paper or newspaper called the Northern Star, which gave him more freedom than having to go to white-led lobbies or publish a book in a white-led publishing company. It gave him less censor, and he was able to speak his mind on slavery and his ideas on human rights. The political climate during this time was uh, somewhat of a nonchalant, non-talking about slavery type of climate because it was dangerous to be an abolitionist at this time, and mobs would easily uh, destroy meetings held about abolitionism. Although during this time, abolitionists were very active, and in spite of the danger. Cotton is a major resource for the United States right now. Americani refers to the inexpensive use of cotton. There's a quote um, down below at the bottom about how important cotton is. Although Frederick Douglass did not grow up on uh, a cotton field, he grew up in a tobacco producing state, and it was much easier for him to attain freedom because of how the high population of free blacks in the area. The narrative focuses on Frederick Douglass, who is originally born as Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. Some characters to know would be Hugh and Sophia Auld, who are the owners of Frederick Douglass as he is taken to Baltimore. And Sophia Auld is important to show the corruption of slavery in the South. She used to be a very sweet person and then turns into a somewhat stricter and coarse uh, master. And Hugh Auld is the person who gives Frederick Douglass the idea of how to achieve his freedom. Um, Aaron Anthony is Frederick Douglass's first master. Edward Covey is the overseer who gives Frederick Douglass, who tries to break Frederick Douglass. He is a slave breaker who people give them slaves to be broken, and where he has his first physical confrontation with Edward Covey, but somehow manages to survive afterwards. The overseers are not that important towards the novel, just to show the cruelty of slave owners. The narrative is somewhat censored. It's not the narrative that he would have liked to have written, but because of the white audience he's trying to reach and the publishing companies, he omitted some of the aspects of love and other influences on his life. Uh, the concept of man versus brute is very heavily shown in this, and what separates the two is knowledge. Uh, Hugh Auld is the person again that says this quote of teaching slaves to read, and it is what sparks what gives Frederick Douglass the knowledge to escape slavery. Um, Sophia Auld is a good reference that Frederick Douglass put in there to show the corruption of slavery for both white and black citizens of the South. As I already mentioned, he also has a problem with Christianity, as he's said that he's never had, as he said that all of his Christian masters were far worse than any of his non-Christian or non-religious masters. Here's some subversions that Frederick Douglass uh, goes up against immediately um, in the beginning of the novel. These are the foundations of the Southern slavery and and subjugation. Um, these form the institution of masters and slaves that Frederick Douglass has to overcome throughout his journey. Literacy is a big force in the novel. It shows that it gives him access and power to hire to be discontent with his situation, and it gives him knowledge of outside worlds and places that are better, and it also helps him. Well, didn't necessarily help him in the but it gave him the ability to forge his documents if he needed to travel. Um, some big devices in this are imagery. He does this to give an emotional appeal to his audience of white viewers, and he uses very descriptive um, words and diction to show the brutality of slavery. He uses a lot of metaphors and allusions to somewhat hypocrisize Christian beliefs and just to make things more relatable. There's a big emphasis on truth. Um, Truth is a big point in his writing, although he does omit things to prevent himself and others from to prevent others from being exposed. Syntax is a big thing for the narrative. It uses a lot of language that of politicians and sermons. The narrative is similar to Rousseau's Confessions because they're both very honest and they both show childhood upbringings. Here's some citations. There you go.